Today's tale of resilience and tenacity takes us to the early 19th century Rocky Mountains and North America's untamed wilderness, which was both a source of abundant opportunity and innumerable dangers. Even just basic survival in this era meant confronting the raw brutality of Mother Nature head-on, a relentless test of endurance that challenged even the hardiest of men engaged in frontier exploration. Very few made their dreams of fortune reality. Many barely escaped with their lives, and countless others perished. Yet those who did endure carried the indelible mark of their experiences for the rest of their days. Out of the great number of those brave and hardy men and women who called this rugged wilderness home, one man's story of survival against seemingly insurmountable odds stands out above the rest. Renowned expert of the outdoors, a master tracker and fur trapper, our first ultimate badass, the indomitable and unstoppable Hugh Glass. Born sometime between the mid-1770s and 1783 in Pennsylvania, Glass faced hardship from the very beginning. Orphaned at a young age, a circumstance, while not unheard of in those times, must have been a profoundly difficult ordeal for a boy trying to navigate his place in the world. Such early adversity undoubtedly forged the bedrock of his inner grit, resourcefulness, and self-sufficiency that he became famous for in his later years. And while it's not definitively known, it wouldn't be outlandish to imagine the young Glass first honing his forestry and survival skills during this period, hunting small game to eat or trade, tracking prey, and setting simple snare traps, learning not only through trial and error, but also from seasoned hunters and the occasional US-aligned natives who he crossed paths with, who were deeply knowledgeable about the ways of the great outdoors. Details from his travels during his adolescence remain scarce, but we do know that he enlisted in the US Army around his mid-20s. This decision was undoubtedly driven by a desire to carve out his own destiny and forge a better life for himself, escaping the poverty-stricken circumstances he was born into. It is most likely that he served as a private within the ranks of the United States Army, as historical records offer no indication of him attaining a higher commissioned rank. However, it remains a possibility that he may have risen to the position of a non-commissioned officer at some point during his military service. Records indicate that Hugh Glass fought through the duration of the 1812 War against the British, sometimes dubbed the Second War of Independence, under General William Henry Atkinson. Glass would have seen considerable action under General Atkinson's command during the war, most notably fighting at the Battle of the Thames in 1813, where US troops retook the previously lost city of Detroit from defending British forces. After the war concluded in 1815, there is some evidence to suggest that the frontiersmen continued to fight under the US flag for a short time. This subsequent service involved participation in various Western expeditions aimed at engaging the Native American tribes that had previously forged alliances with the British during the recent war. However, it's important to note that the nature and scale of this post-war fighting differed significantly from the protracted and larger-scale conflict of the preceding 3 years. Instead, his involvement likely consisted primarily of scouting missions, smaller skirmishes, and maintaining a presence in the newly acquired territories. Following his time in the military, the imposing figure of the 6-foot-tall, 190-pound war veteran tried his hand at various menial vocations, but quickly realized they would not quell his acquired appetite for adventure. He utilized his extensive knowledge and experience in tracking and scouting, deciding to join the Rocky Mountain Fur Company as a fur trapper and expedition guide. The daily existence of mountain men, better known as frontiersmen, was fraught with treacherous peril. where a wrong turn could set you back days, if not weeks, and potentially cost a man his very life. Expeditions often stretched for months on end, sometimes embarked solitarily and at other times in small groups. Either way, there was no guarantee of reward. If you didn't catch your prize, you would have no pelts to sell on your return to civilization, thus no income. On top of all of this, there were the apex predators of the land, and large aggressive megafauna like moose and bison to contend with, occasional deadly encounters with hostile tribes, run-ins with nefarious actors and unsavory characters, and 100 other potential ways to perish deep in the wilderness. While such a life might seem like a poor bargain, riddled with such significant risks, for experts like Glass and his contemporaries, it represented a profound sense of freedom and a chance at uncharted exploration, a substantial wage that compensated for the dangers, and a life immersed in the raw and awe-inspiring beauty of the natural world. In the summer of 1823, Glass joined a band of his colleagues for a 6-month expedition, also fur trappers like himself, through the wilds of South Dakota in search of pelts and new hunting grounds. The vast Great Plains and Rocky Mountains were their chosen domain this trip around, and with early successes it was looking to be a fruitful endeavor for the men. However, on the fateful day of August 19th, while hunting alone, Glass had the profound misfortune of being stumbled upon and startling a grizzly sow with her cubs, who are infamous for their protective instincts. Frantically scrambling to shoulder his smoothbore flintlock rifle, he managed to get a shot off at the charging beast, hell-bent on protecting her young, but she shrugged off the large caliber lead ball and was on top of him within seconds. The resulting melee was every frontiersman's nightmare. Without hesitation, the 500-pound bear ripped and tore at his flesh with her 5-inch claws and bone-breaking canines. Flung to the ground and dragged across the forest floor in her crushing jaws, Glass somehow managed to unsheath his hunting knife and began repeatedly stabbing at the massive animal, striking the grizzly with such adrenaline-fueled ferocity that after a prolonged and brutal struggle, enduring repeated maulings, the bear finally retreated back into the wilderness with her cubs. The resulting injuries inflicted upon Glass were catastrophic. He suffered large gaping wounds across his back, legs and chest. His face was mangled with deep cuts and a shattered orbital bone, and his scalp was partially torn off. A severely lacerated windpipe rendered speech impossible, and he had sustained extreme blood loss along with several broken ribs that had pierced both of his lungs. Utterly spent, exhausted, and by all accounts teetering on the brink of death, Glass was discovered shortly after by his companions John Fitzgerald and Jim Bridger, who had been alerted by the sound of the gunshot. Upon witnessing the horrific state he was in, no one held out much hope for his survival, given the extensive nature of his wounds, the significant blood loss, and their remote location. This far removed from any semblance of civilization, they had seen men die for much less a mistake or injury than this in the unforgiving wilds of South Dakota, and were almost unanimously certain of his grim end. After bringing Glass back to the hunting camp and tending to his wounds as best they could, with a heavy heart the group's leader, Andrew Henry, made the difficult but pragmatic decision, for the sake of the group's survival, to leave the seemingly dying man there. The longer the men stayed out in the wilderness, the less chance any of them had of making it out, and much less their hard-earned quarry. Appointing 2 men, the aforementioned John Fitzgerald and Jim Bridger, to stay and care for Glass until he either succumbed to his wounds or recovered enough to travel. Bidding a somber farewell to the trio, the main party departed towards Fort Kiowa to get help for their injured comrade, resupply dwindling essential goods, and deposit their valuable pelts. For Glass, those first few days were touch and go. He could hardly take any water or food due to his lacerated windpipe. Even breathing was an arduous task, and to Fitzgerald and Bridger he did not appear to be getting any better. After a few days of caring for the wounded man, Fitzgerald, who was noted for his self-serving and selfish nature, was getting restless and started to influence the young 19-year-old Bridger that they would not survive if they stayed any longer. Inexperienced in such dire situations in the wild and under pressure by the senior man, and although morally conflicted on the matter, after a few more days of Fitzgerald's incessant bickering of their assured demise, Bridger finally agreed to the proposal in leaving Glass to die to save themselves. Taking with them what little supplies the main group had left behind, save for a scant amount of water, his hunting knife and damaged hunting rifle, the two men hurriedly went away after their companions in the direction of Fort Kiowa, leaving Glass alone in the wilderness, vulnerable and afraid, to the cruel mercies of fate. We do not know how long Glass laid there, under those most terrible conditions, but it must have been one of the most hopeless and vulnerable times of his life. A man of such vigour and independence, now near lifeless with no hope of reprieve from his torturous solitary destitution. The excruciating pain he had to endure with every breath as his shattered ribs pierced his lungs, the cold mountain winds biting at his skin, and the vulnerability of not being able to move a muscle amidst ever-present dangers. And the most painful of all, the betrayal of the men he had known day in, day out for months, if not years, who had sworn an oath of protecting and caring for him under orders of their superior. After suffering many days and nights, or perhaps weeks, Glass somehow found his resolve and silently promised himself that he would not die out there, alone and destitute, in the wilds of South Dakota. Gathering what little strength he had recovered, he tore up his cot by hand and redressed the wounds he could reach, and with a singular purpose of mind and broken body, he began to snake-belly through the rugged terrain towards Fort Kiowa, with a heart full of rage towards those who had abandoned him to death and destruction. The going was slow and painful. Unable to walk and having to rest often, he foraged what sustenance he could from nearby shrubs and foliage, and drank water from streams he passed, all the while keeping alert for predators and trying to shield himself from the elements. Collapsing in exhaustion at the end of each day in any nooks and crannies he happened across, or sometimes only managing to scrape his shattered body under large bushes for some meagre form of protection at night while he slept. Using every drop of his extensive knowledge he had acquired of the outdoors to stay alive. As snow started to come down heavily due to the changing of the seasons, Glass miraculously continued and kept going despite his condition and the new drop in temperature. Day after day, mile after mile, he crawled through the treacherous snow-filled mountains, hills and plains, somehow escaping frostbite, the teeth of hungry predators and the jaws of death. Fighting not only for every breath, but also against severe infection and a high fever throughout the ordeal, starvation and exposure beckoned Glass to the grave, but he refused to answer their haunting calls. Growing in strength slowly, he managed to trap a few small animals and fish, opportunely eat carrion when he found it, and began to stand upright for short periods to strengthen himself further. His mental fortitude and acuity helped him greatly, and gave him the ability to navigate the correct paths towards civilization and in the direction of Fort Kiowa, the holy Mecca of his salvation. He met a handful of people along his long and arduous journey and motioned for their assistance, but none wanted anything to do with him due to his bloody appearance and inability to talk. Some weeks into his journey now, and around a month since the bear attack, he managed to start walking, albeit slowly and in a crippled manner, and realized he could shoulder his partially damaged rifle. Now able to take down big game and being substantially closer to the human world, Glass was able to trade with other fur trappers and natives with the meat and pelts he accrued for life-saving commodities such as winter clothes and rudimentary medicines. He got lucky chancing upon a hunting party of Arikara natives who were initially hostile but soon realized that Glass meant no ill will, and that he was in dire straits. In turn for some meat, they assisted him by redressing his wounds and helping him along his way for a while near the end of his journey. After a mammoth 7-week ordeal and 200 miles of fighting tooth and nail at every turn to stay alive, the exhausted, battered, and malnourished Glass finally saw the sweet silhouette of Fort Kiowa in the distance. An old remote wooden palisade most likely never looked so appealing to a man before or since Hugh Glass set his eyes upon the structure. But now he was nearly at his destination. Glass had one thing on his mind, or should we say, one person on his mind, and he had a score to settle. Glass had been lucid throughout the time he was laying there in the hunting camp. He had heard how Fitzgerald had bullied and influenced the young Bridger. He could hear the plans of betrayal being set, and could do nothing about it when they were executed. But now, as he approached the gates of Fort Kiowa, he had his rifle loaded and had summoned what little strength and energy he had left after his own personal odyssey to exact revenge on the man who had left him for dead. Luckily for both men, they were nowhere to be found at that moment. Word had gotten back to the fort that Glass was alive from the Arikara. They had fled the scene, knowing that Glass would require blood for their deep and indignant betrayal. He never found Fitzgerald, and no one knows what became of the traitorous fur trapper, but it wouldn't be surprising if he met an ill fate for his ill deeds in the end. After he could not find them, he garnered support from those in the fort, and there were petitions signed to make the men wanted for murder, although these were never officially signed off on or came to anything in the end. Glass eventually caught up with Bridger many years later. Amazingly, Glass had forgiven the man by that time. Although he confronted him about Bridger leaving him, he did him no harm, knowing that the real perpetrator was Fitzgerald and that the boy had just been scared and impressionable. They even became friends after things were cleared up, and Glass remarked he was impressed that Bridger was only 19 years old when trapping in the wilds of South Dakota with the men. Incredibly, the bear mauling, betrayal of his own men, and the 7-week journey from hell and back did not deter Glass from living a frontiersman life again, and as soon as he was healed up and able, he was back out in the wilderness fur trapping. We don't have any documented details, but it is rumoured that he went on many more adventures in the next 10 years. While none as intense as the one that made him famous, they were noteworthy and fitting for the mountain man. In the end, his love for adventure and danger would end Glass's life in 1833, when he was killed on another expedition by Arikara natives near the Grand River. The same people who had, ironically, helped him survive after his bear attack in 1823, although likely a different group of members within the tribe. We don't know the root cause of the conflict, but it's widely accepted as a dispute over hunting grounds or a bartering deal gone wrong, which turned into a violent skirmish. Glass, being caught in the fray, was wounded fatally and would never walk those winding paths of the wild again. Hugh Glass's story is one of true grit, determination, courage, forgiveness, and perseverance in the face of seemingly impossible odds. He became an American folk legend because of his exploits, and the tale of his overcoming the most inconceivably loaded deck has inspired millions since his lifetime. The journey made by one man who would not quit in one of the most dire situations you could find yourself in the remotest and most unforgiving wilderness on the planet, is told to this day as a testament of humanity's ability to adapt and overcome anything we are confronted with. Glass was the personification of mental fortitude, concentrated willpower, and inner endurance, traits that resonate deeply with every generation. He shows us the complex duality of man in both his thirst for revenge and his offering of forgiveness. But most importantly, he reminds us that no matter the odds, to dare to hope in a hopeless situation can save us all. Immortalized in popular culture through museums, books, and movies, Hugh Glass is undoubtedly one of humanity's ultimate badasses.